I'm Janet Jalil, and at 16 hours GMT on Friday the 30th of January, these are our main stories. Iran says it's ready for talks with the US, but only on equal terms after Donald Trump's threats of military action. China lifts sanctions on a group of British parliamentarians during a visit by the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. The US President nominates an outspoken critic of the central bank, the Federal Reserve, to succeed Jerome Powell. We'll tell you who he is. Also in this podcast, could our genes be crucial to living long and healthy lives? New research suggests that our genes could be more important than previously thought.
The fact that genes determine how long we live is hardly surprising because we know your chance of breast cancer, your chance of cardiovascular disease, that runs in families. You can inherit some of that risk.
And the UK becomes the latest country to trial self-driving taxis, coming later this year.
My first observation is no driver, no pedals, no steering wheel, but it feels quite normal.
At the height of the Iranian protests this year, President Trump promised help was on its way, only to backtrack as thousands of demonstrators were slaughtered by the regime's security forces. Now the US president is again threatening to strike Iran after sending what he calls a huge US armada to the Middle East, while at the same time signalling that he is open to negotiations.
We have a lot of very big, very powerful ships sailing to Iran right now. And it would be great if we didn't have to use them. Okay?
Can you say what the message was that you shared with Iranians?
Well, I told them two things. Number one, no nuclear. And number two, stop killing protesters. They're killing them by the thousands.
Iran, weakened by earlier US and Israeli attacks, is now intensifying its diplomatic efforts. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has been holding talks in Turkey, where President Erdogan has offered to mediate between Tehran and Washington. Mr. Araghchi told journalists that Iran was ready to speak to the US about its nuclear program, but only on equal terms, and that currently no such talks had been set up.
In relation to a possible meeting or talk with American officials, we do not have any plan or program. But what we want to see is we are ready for a just, a fair and equitable negotiation. And the preconditions of such a fair and equitable negotiation is still not yet fulfilled. About the type of negotiation, the venue of that. First of all, we need to see the preconditions and the preliminary talks about this.
I got more from BBC Persian's Sarah Namju.
As you mentioned, the Iranian foreign minister is in Istanbul today as Turkey is trying to mediate between Iran and the United States. Iranian foreign minister Abbas Araghchi said that Iran is prepared to resume the talks with the United States, but that talk should be fair, as he said and as he put it, and should not include Iran's defense capability. And he repeated that Iran is ready to negotiate to reduce the tensions in the Middle East. And he was in a joint conference with the Turkish Foreign Ministry, and he also said that diplomacy is their priority. In recent days, Iran's neighboring country in the Middle East, they've been trying to increase their efforts for diplomatic negotiation and kind of to mediate between Iran and the US and to lower the tensions.
And this all comes as alarm is growing over those US warships heading towards the Middle East. President Trump is also signalling that he wants to talk to Iran. He says he wants it to stop it killing protesters and to end its nuclear ambitions. How are the Iranians likely to respond to those two requests?
Exactly. It seems that President Trump is willing to give diplomacy a chance and has put it in his latest remark. He said that he wants Iran to stop nuclear activities and also killing the protesters. He also said that the U.S. officials are in touch with the Iranian officials. People, I can say that in Iran, they are looking at all these diplomatic efforts and also military build-up very anxiously. They don't know what is going to happen next. And also President Trump has so far proved that he is unpredictable. We don't know what the U.S. next step would be, but we are seeing that
Absolutely. We're still
increasing diplomatic effort is that Iran doesn't want this war to start.
And those protests that were crushed earlier this month, what do we know now about how many people were killed?
Actually, as you've been reporting on the internet shutdown in Iran, it's very difficult to come up with an exact number of people and protesters who've been killed. The number that we currently have and human rights groups are reporting is even up to 17,000 people, and some other groups are putting it up to 30,000. It's very difficult to come up with an exact figure, but the situation is really worrying. We are still having difficulties to contact with people inside Iran because of the internet situation, and also we are facing arrest of doctors, medical staff, and other people who've been part of the protest.
Sarah Namju. China has lifted sanctions on a group of British parliamentarians during a visit by the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. The restrictions had been imposed after the MPs criticised China over alleged human rights abuses against the Uyghur minority. The British Prime Minister made the announcement during a visit to Shanghai at the end of a trip designed to boost Britain's economic ties with China. Here's our political editor, Chris Mason, who's travelling with him.
So this is the third day of the Prime Minister's trip to China. Spent a couple of days in Beijing, flew to Shanghai and has done a series of interviews, including one for me for the BBC. And news in that interview, that in those discussions that he has had with President Xi in the last 24 hours or so, news that parliamentarians in the UK who had been sanctioned by China for remarks they had made about China, not least about the Uyghur people, imposing restrictions on them in terms of their travel, for instance, to China, that those sanctions are being lifted. Alongside that, a former MP, an academic and a lawyer, were not sure about the sanction status for them, but for the parliamentarians, a lifting of those sanctions. Let's listen to the exchange I had with the Prime Minister on this topic. There is deep concern from some back home about Chinese spying, about espionage, about human rights concerns, and MPs who have been sanctioned by China. What do you say to those who are worried, who at the very least seek reassurance given your desire for a closer relationship?
One of the benefits of engaging is to not only seize the opportunities, but to raise those difficult, sensitive issues, which you can't raise if you're not in the room, you can't raise if you don't have a leader-to-leader meeting. On the question of the parliamentarians, I know it's a cause of concern, which is why I did raise it. And the response of the Chinese as a result of our discussions is that the restrictions no longer apply.
Already lifted from now.
President Xi said to me that means that all parliamentarians are free to travel to China. Now that rather vindicates my approach, because that's only because we're here that we have had the engagement, and that has provided the opportunity for a leader-to-leader discussion on sensitive issues, as well as the opportunities that we've opened up through this visit.
And those 6 parliamentarians, and indeed one former MP, Tim Lawton, got wind that this announcement might be coming and put out a joint statement. They said, "We reject any deal that prioritises our personal convenience over the pursuit of justice for the Uyghur people." They also set out a concern about whether or not this deal had any knock-on ramifications for Chinese individuals that the UK has sanctioned.
Chris Mason in Shanghai. President Trump has issued an executive order which declares a national emergency on Cuba and applies punitive tariffs against any nation which supplies it with oil. It's the latest step the US has taken to increase pressure on the communist-run island and follows American forces' capture of a close ally of Cuba's, the Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, earlier this month. Many analysts interpret the executive order as being largely directed at Mexico, which, since Mr. Maduro was seized, has replaced Venezuela in becoming a big supplier of oil to Cuba. From Mexico City, Will Grant reports.
The executive order by President Trump does 2 things. The first is that by declaring a state of emergency over Cuba, the Trump administration is, in effect, arguing that the island's energy supply is now a question of US national security. The order said that Cuba hosts Russia's largest overseas signals intelligence facility and also mentioned the island's relations with what it called malign actors adverse to the United States, specifically China, Iran, Hamas and Hezbollah. The other thing the order does is threaten consequences in the form of tariffs against any nation which continues to supply the beleaguered communist-run island with crude oil.